We are 3 months into 2025, and I'm kicking off the month by finally talking about books on this channel. I read 4 books to be released in March, and actually, by the time this is uploaded, one of them will already be out, and I'll be sharing my opinions with you all. If you don't know me, hi, I'm Nadia. My current career path is in public health, but I've also worked in journalism. I used to write book reviews for Affinity magazine, and I really want to get back into it. So, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, don't mind my appearance too much. I was just fighting the wind outside, but I wanted to talk about the first book that I read on my list of March releases I want to review, and that's Boy with Wings by Mark Mustian. Boy with Wings is a historical novel set in the 1930s. It's about a boy who quite literally has wings, or rather, he has a birthmark and appendages on his back that look like he's growing wings. And this boy, Johnny, he lives with his mother, Lena, in Tallahassee, Florida. And because of the time period and where they live, he's viewed as the devil in his community. He's blamed for all kinds of illness and death going on in his community. And because of this, he's really ostracized. And so his mother decides to solve this by faking his death and burying him alive. And that's literally in like chapter 1. The purpose of him dying was so that he and his mother could leave and go live with relatives in Tennessee. And so their goal was to just go on and live a new life. But once they leave, Lena actually ends up dying of tuberculosis, so Johnny is left by himself. He's not entirely by himself. He's living out in the woods with Black people in this camp. And based on the time period, it sounds like it's the Civilian Conservation Corps, but I think the timeline is a little bit off. It's too late to be the contraband camps from the Civil War, but it's too early to be the CCC, so maybe there's a gap in my history knowledge there. Let me know. But either way, he's living out in the woods, he's made friends, he has people that care for him, but he is the sole white person in this group of Black people. So of course he's spotted and he's taken out of the camp by other white people because he's not supposed to be there and he's not allowed to stay with them. So after this, he's in police custody, and then 2 men end up coming to claim him, and they claim they're going to take him back to his family in Tallahassee, but they end up taking him into captivity. And eventually, they sell him to a traveling freak show. And that's how we get to the main plot of the story. On his website, Mustian said that he really wanted to explore what it felt like to be different through this novel. And in this universe, I think difference is really correlated with isolation and violation. Johnny is really put in a lot of situations where he feels like people are leaving him, or he feels like he can't relate to other people. And there's also a lot of violation in the sense that he's viewed as a freak. People feel like they can touch him, even though that's something he doesn't want. And people really just put him in situations where he doesn't have a lot of agency and he's not able to defend himself as thoroughly as he would like to. There's also a sense of him both being reviled for being different and also being treated as a spectacle, especially during the carnival. He's really treated as something to gawk at. He's treated as something special. The crew that he works with at the carnival, they're like, he's the main event. You're so special. We do everything for you. But at the same time, they're simultaneously taking his agency away. They're not communicating with him when it comes to things that impact him. He ended up dating someone, the carnival leader's daughter, and he was tutoring her. He was really trying to help her out, form a relationship with her, and then out of nowhere, it sprung on him that she is planning to go away to school. So that's another instance where he's having something taken away from him, and he didn't even know that this was happening, essentially. And the reason her going away to school is betrayal is because he's being talked into staying with the carnival. He's different. He can't go anywhere. So once again, he is trapped and he is isolated. And along with Johnny being really physically unable to escape his circumstances, at least for extended periods of time, there's an element of not being able to escape his past either, because he faked his death to avoid scrutiny, and yet people from his hometown, they found him because he's now famous at the carnival. And he ended up running into one of his friends from the camp he lived at later on. And even when people left the carnival, he still ran into them again. So it's this element of constantly crossing paths with people that he's met before, and they've really had an impact on him in some way, and yet he can't leave that influence behind. I also noticed that there was a dichotomy between real and not real. Like, Johnny had a lot of nightmares and he had to convince himself that they weren't real. When he started working in the carnival, there was a lot of doubt about whether his wings were real or whether other aspects of the carnival were real, whether people in the carnival really had those deformities or they were just added on. And then there are also elements of Johnny being the real thing. He's the real star of the show, like I mentioned before. There's also a strong element of religion in this book, and so that ties into the real versus not real because Johnny's trying to figure out what he believes. And then there's also a character in the carnival who has a degree in religion. He's really invested in religion. He believes the other freaks in the carnival are freaks of nature, they're of the devil. But when he encounters Johnny, he's convinced Johnny is an angel. So there's that element as well. And this particular character really has a lot of trauma involved as well. So just really a lot of hurt going around, and that's really typical of the Southern Gothic genre, which this book is part of. And then also I do want to note the reason that we know that this particular character is traumatized is because we get different perspectives of different characters. Johnny is kind of the main narrator, but we do occasionally jump into other perspectives of people who interact with him. And those characters usually give us a perspective on things that Johnny doesn't really comprehend because Johnny is a child growing up through most of the book. He becomes more aware later on, but early on especially, you really get a sense of what's going on around him that he doesn't necessarily understand. And you also see how he has impacted them and how they impact him, how they view him. So I think that was a really helpful device in sort of fleshing out the narrative a bit more. Overall, I thought Boy with Wings was a great book. A lot of layers to the story. I think it was really woven together really well, and I'd really recommend it to people. And it comes out March 15th. Okay, I just finished The Plot Twist by Eleanor Goymer, and I have a lot of thoughts. This book comes out March 25th. I got an advanced reader copy from NetGalley, and it's basically the publishing version of The Holiday with Kate Winslet and Cameron Diaz. The main protagonist is Ali Edwards. She's a British romance author. She's just finished her 6th or 7th book, and she's expected to write her next book according to her contract, but she's having writer's block. She's at a publishing event when she runs into Martin Clark, who is a crime author, and he also needs to write a book because he squandered his advance by giving it to his daughter, and he needs to make the money back. So essentially, they decide to get together and work on each other's stories together. At this same publishing event, Allie runs into Will, who ends up being her love interest. And the story kind of goes back and forth between Allie working with Martin and also her relationship with Will. I definitely found this book entertaining. There were bits of comedy that I really enjoyed, and I think the general premise of it was interesting, but I also found it really frustrating. Towards the end of the book, Allie's best friend says she's a great writer, but she's not a good communicator, or something along those lines. And that is just a line that really encompasses Allie's character, because Allie's lack of communication drives like half the plot of this book, which I think is annoying. She also just makes such interesting choices that I can't picture other people making. And I mean, I guess that contributes to the drama, but it's honestly so insane that it's like, why would you even think to do this? Because essentially, when her and Martin swap stories, essentially, she gives him this crime story that she's plotted, in which there's a serial killer targeting bankers, right? And her romance that she's writing is based on Martin and his wife, Angie. However, she takes so much from their life that she literally names the characters Martin and Angie. What happened to any resemblance to real or fictional people is unintended. Like, why would you even give them the same names? And it just blew up into this whole big thing because she can't make good decisions. I do think the book is at least self-aware about how insane Allie is, because she's actually called out multiple times for her bad decision making, but at the same time it's like, girl, come on. I also think the pacing of the book is a bit off. That might be because of length. My ebook said it was only 282 pages, which I think is a little short, And it just felt like there was a lot of information dumping and not enough time to wrap up all the plot lines or flesh them out thoroughly enough. Like, there's two main relationships. There's Allie and Will, and then there's Allie and Martin. And I came out of the book not really particularly caring about either of those relationships, which I don't think is a good thing, especially because Martin is described in the synopsis as being a father figure for Allie. And even in the book, one of the characters, her best friend, makes a comment about Allie trying to replace her dead father with Martin. But I don't think we've seen enough of Allie and Martin's relationship to even draw that conclusion. Like, I don't get the sense that Martin is much of a father to Allie at all, because if anything, it feels like she's giving him advice more than he's helping her. So, I don't know. There's just a lot going on and not the strongest execution. I didn't hate the book. I thought it was fine, but I don't think it's something I would read again. But if you're looking for a quick read, a romance, or something that has a lot of drama, even though that drama is kind of self-inflicted, I would definitely check it out. The next book I'm reviewing is Three Little Lies by Danielle Stewart. It comes out March 13th, and I got an advanced reader copy from NetGalley. Three Little Lies is about a woman named Jo who takes in a foreign exchange student from England to fix the dynamics in her household, but their family ends up being thrown into chaos when their student goes missing. The first part of the book is just the family getting acclimated to life of their exchange student, Eden, and although she was brought in to kind of smooth things over, there ends up being a lot of conflict, particularly between Eden and Jo. And that conflict in the house makes it easier for police to blame Jo's husband, Everett, for Eden's eventual disappearance. The synopsis of the book makes it sound like Everett definitely killed Eden, but in the actual story, it becomes clear very quickly that he was falsely accused. There are some things I really enjoyed about this book, and some things I didn't particularly care for. First, I thought the main antagonists and their motives were really interesting. I didn't really anticipate who it was going to be for some reasons I'll touch on in a bit, but I thought that the twist and the reasons for Eden's disappearance were handled very well. As for Jo, she's very much a hypochondriac helicopter mom, and even when she's doing things that I wouldn't necessarily agree with, it's easy to sympathize with her, especially in the beginning, because it's clear that she's having a lot of conflict with Everett about their parenting and how she doesn't feel supported by him. But as the story progresses, I found myself not being on Jo's side as much, because it's very clear that she thinks that she's always right, even when she's clearly wrong and she's not acting very rationally. She also really flip-flops between being Everett's biggest defender when he's accused of hurting Eden to wanting to throw him under the bus immediately. And like, I know in situations like this, it's very hard to have rational reactions, but it just feels like she's being pulled more by her convictions rather than any actual kind of evidence. And Everett is an asshole for sure, but I think the way that the narrative blames him for a lot of things is a bit over the top. That brings me to my next point, which I'm going to try to word very carefully. Something that I noticed with Three Little Lies, and I also noticed it with The Plot Twist by Eleanor Goymer, but I didn't mention it in that review, is that both narrators kind of pay a lot of attention, a lot of thought to feminism and the patriarchy, but I don't know how well either of them handle that topic. There are times where it makes sense to make a connection to feminism and the general view of society on gendered roles. Like, for example, Three Little Lies really focuses on the gender dynamics in parenting, where Jo is the disciplinarian and the one making all the decisions, and Everett is kind of seen as the fun parent who doesn't really make the hard decisions or face conflict with their kids. And I think that's valid. I think that's something that's grounded in reality. On the other hand, I think it kind of veers a little into essentialism sometimes. Going back to The Plot Twist, that book has a plot line where the protagonist, Allie, is trying to take down a publisher at her publishing company, and she's trying to rope the publisher's assistant into this plot, essentially. And she's talking to Martin, which is one of the other characters in that book, and Martin makes a comment to Allie about how, because the assistant hasn't really been responsive to Allie after their initial interactions, and Martin says, you know, maybe the publisher didn't treat his assistant that badly. Maybe that's why she's not responding. And Allie like scolds him for it and says like he's still like weaponizing the patriarchy or whatever. And I remember feeling very weird about that line, because even though Allie was saying something that was technically true, in that people can really take advantage of power in ways that we don't really think about, I just felt like in that situation it didn't entirely apply, and it felt like the narrative was trying to make the publisher more of a villain by making him a misogynist when he was already kind of a bad person. And that's not to say that individual actions can't be connected to society at large, because they obviously can, but I worry about assigning too much to societal expectations, whether positive or negative. As for Three Little Lies, I think it really has an undercurrent of women's behaviors can be blamed on how men treat them. And I think that's true in some cases, but not true in other cases. Because think of Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. We all know Nick cheated on Amy, uprooted her life, etc., etc. Amy uses that to justify what she did, but the narrative doesn't say that she's justified for that. The narrative says both these people suck, and now they're stuck together for life. And so, without spoiling too much, I think that undercurrent really impacts how the story is resolved. And I thought that was an interesting choice, because I really think Joe is just as unscrupulous as the antagonist, which I will not explain further because I don't want to spoil it. Speaking of resolutions, it came up at multiple points throughout the book that Jo had some dark secret in her past. It was highly implied that she had done something wrong, and she was receiving all these threatening letters that she had to hide from her family and this and that. And I really thought that was going to play a bigger role in the story than it actually did. Like, it was implied that whatever she did was the reason she was so overprotective of her kids. And I was even considering if those letters had anything to do with what happened to Eden. And essentially, it wasn't revealed what Jo did until the very last chapter. And it was so anticlimactic that I was just like, that's all it was? I thought it was something serious. So yeah, that element really didn't have much to do with the plot. I think it just showed more of Jo's character than anything else. And so I was gonna say we could have done without it, but I don't know about that. I think now that I'm processing it, I think it reveals more of her character than anything else. So despite those aspects, I really enjoyed the book. I would definitely recommend it to anyone who really enjoys thrillers. While reading it, I honestly kept thinking about Lifetime movies, which is not a bad thing because I've watched a lot of Lifetime movies. And so if that's something you enjoy, I think you'd also enjoy this. And the last book that I read for this month's video is Kirby's Lessons for Falling by Laura Gao. This is a YA graphic novel about Kirby Tan. She's a high schooler who does rock climbing, and she ends up having a season-ending injury, and her school forces her to join a new extracurricular, which results in her joining the school newspaper and joining a astrology love advice column. The co-editor for this column is Bex Santos, who is a very big personality, very much the opposite of Kirby, so it creates an interesting dynamic. The two clash at first because of their differences. Kirby doesn't even believe in astrology, and now she has to write about astrology for this column. And so after that happens, the teacher who runs the club suggests to Kirby that she sort of extend an olive branch and try to make Bex feel validated, and that would improve their relationship. When Kirby's going home from the club, she sees two girls outside talking, and one of them is talking about how she doesn't know if her crush is into her, and how he's a Leo, and how he loves being the center of attention, and how their signs are a good match or whatever. And so Kirby takes this as a sign that she needs to help these people, and so she slips the flyer for the advice column to them so they won't notice, in hopes of getting them to submit to the advice column. And ultimately, they do. So the advice column has their first letter to respond to, and so they respond, it's all great, and then Bex decides it's not enough to respond to letters, we actually need to go get people together. So Bex and Kirby and some other people from the newspaper club, they go to actually go facilitate this couple getting together. But that's not exactly what happens. The girl actually ends up getting with a completely different guy. But it did result in a relationship, and apparently this girl was an influencer, so she posts online about how she got into a relationship because of this column, and then she posts a link to the column, and this ultimately results in the column blowing up and becoming more popular. Now that the column is more popular, Bex and Kirby are working together more often, they're forming a bond, they're really getting along more, and so that results in their relationship developing as they're facilitating these other relationships in kind of a matchmaker way. One of the main commonalities between Bex and Kirby is that they're both dealing with a lot of parental expectations. Bex is the youngest sibling in her family. She's dealing with a lot of pressure, a lot of expectation because her siblings are essentially perfect. She has a sister at Juilliard, and they're all really accomplished, and the newspaper is ultimately one of the only things that Bex is good at. And on the other hand, Kirby has to deal with the expectations of her parents. Her mother is the main caretaker for the family because her father passed away, and she has to deal with trying to satisfy her mother's expectations and try to live up to their church's expectations, which is another aspect. And then also she wants to really please her father because her father was who got her into rock climbing in the first place, and she's trying to sort of carry out that legacy. Speaking of the church, religion does come up quite a bit in this book. That is partially because I believe Laura Gao grew up in a Christian family and she really wanted to speak to that experience. And Kirby is Christian herself. The expectations of her church community come up a lot throughout the book. And also the fact that they kind of like gossip about anything that seems unseemly in their community. And that's something she's really grappling with as she's dealing with her rock climbing career and her relationship with Bex and things of that sort. And then also, on the other hand, Bex and her family actually left the church because of their judgment. And Bex really got into astrology because, as she said in the book, it's no eternal hell, just vibes, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing to say. But at the same time, I think the book really acknowledges that a lot of people have a lot of different beliefs and people tend to gravitate to what works best for them. And none of them are particularly right or wrong. It's just what feels right for you. And as long as you don't feel judged, then it's something that can be a positive experience. But at the end of the day, even though Kirby is worried about what her church community will think of her, they ultimately show that they care about her no matter what. Back to Bex and Kirby's relationship, they do have some hiccups, particularly because of Kirby's aforementioned worries about what people will think of her. And this actually results in Kirby sending a letter to the column herself, trying to win Bex back over, which I thought was very cute. And ultimately, things ended up well. Overall, I thought the story was very sweet. I don't read graphic novels all the time, but I think the visual medium is really interesting for foreshadowing and really sort of understanding who our characters are. The colors in this book are primarily blue and black and white with like splashes of red, and I found that the red was used a lot for emphasis or in situations where there were a lot of emotions going on, so I thought that was an interesting touch. And that color scheme seems different from Laura Gao's previous book, which was her memoir, Messy Roots. So I'd definitely be interested to know the thought process behind that color scheme. I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who likes graphic novels, romance, or YA literature. And with that, this month's review video has come to a close. Thank you for listening. If you liked what you saw, definitely be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on these books in the comments.